I never thought a snowstorm in Boulder, Colorado would turn me into a criminal. But that's exactly what happened when Patricia Hendricks decided that my late-night snow shoveling was destroying the neighborhood's peace and tranquility. My name is Paul Foster, and I've lived in the Ridgemont Hills townhouse community for 3 years. It's one of those places where everything looks perfect from the outside, matching mailboxes, manicured lawns in summer, and strict rules about what color you can paint your front door. I bought my unit because the price was right, and the location was convenient for my job as an emergency room nurse at Boulder Community Health. The 12-hour night shifts meant I kept odd hours, but I figured in a city like Boulder, nobody would care when I came and went. I was wrong. Patricia Hendricks was 52 years old with that specific haircut that screamed, "I want to speak to your manager," from 3 blocks away. She'd been the HOA president for 6 years, and according to my neighbor Doug, she treated the position like she was running a small dictatorship. I'd had a few run-ins with her before, once about parking my car 2 inches over the line in my designated spot. Another time about hanging a bird feeder that apparently violated some obscure bylaw about exterior decorations. But the snow shoveling incident was what finally pushed things over the edge. It started in late January, right after a particularly brutal storm dumped 18 inches of snow on Boulder overnight. I'd just gotten home from a grueling shift at the hospital around 7 in the morning, and the entire parking lot was buried. My assigned spot was completely covered, and worse, the snow had piled up against the emergency exit doors at the back of the building, the ones that led out from the ground floor units and the common laundry room. I grabbed my shovel and spent 2 hours clearing a path to my door, my parking spot, and the emergency exits. It was backbreaking work, but someone had to do it. The HOA had a contract with a snow removal company, but they never showed up until late afternoon, and even then, they only did the main walkways and the street access. The emergency exits were always an afterthought. That evening, around 6 o'clock, I was just waking up when I heard a sharp knock on my door. I opened it to find Patricia standing there in a puffy white jacket that made her look like an aggressive marshmallow, holding a clipboard like it was a weapon. "Paul Foster," she said, even though she knew exactly who I was. "That's me," I said, still groggy. "I need to speak with you about this morning's activities." She tapped her pen against the clipboard with each word for emphasis. "What activities? You were observed shoveling snow at 7 in the morning. We've received multiple complaints about the noise." I rubbed my eyes. "Patricia, there was 18 inches of snow. I had to clear my spot and the walkway. The HOA has a contracted service for snow removal. Residents are not permitted to engage in their own snow clearing between the hours of 8 p.m. and 8 a.m. It's in the bylaws, Section 12, subsection 4. Are you serious right now?" She thrust the clipboard toward me, showing a highlighted section of text I'd never bothered to read. Sure enough, there it was, a rule prohibiting noisy outdoor maintenance activities during nighttime hours, which apparently included snow shoveling. "This is insane," I said. "I work night shifts. I get home in the morning. When am I supposed to shovel?" "That's not the HOA's concern, Mr. Foster. The rules apply equally to all residents. Consider this your official warning. If you violate this rule again, you'll be fined $250 per incident." She turned on her heel and marched away before I could respond, leaving me standing in my doorway wondering if I'd somehow stumbled into a satirical novel about suburban hell. The next few weeks were quiet. We had a couple of smaller snowfalls, and I made sure to only shovel during approved hours, even though it meant staying awake when I desperately needed sleep, or waking up hours before my shift to clear paths in the dark before 8 p.m. hit. Then February brought the big one. The Weather Service had been warning about it for days, a massive system moving down from Canada that was expected to dump 2 to 3 feet of snow on the Front Range. The storm hit on a Wednesday afternoon, right as I was heading to work for my night shift. By the time I got to the hospital, the snow was already falling so hard I could barely see 10 feet ahead. It was chaos in the ER that night. Car accidents, people slipping on ice, elderly patients with hypothermia who'd lost power in their homes. I didn't stop moving for 12 straight hours. When my shift finally ended at 7 Thursday morning, I was exhausted to my core. The drive home took an hour instead of the usual 20 minutes, and when I finally pulled onto my street, I saw that Ridgemont Hills looked like it had been relocated to Antarctica. The snow was catastrophic. It had drifted against buildings, buried cars completely, and turned the parking lot into an impassable white desert. I managed to park on the street about a block away, the only spot I could find that had been partially cleared by a plow. I trudged through the knee-deep snow toward my building, and that's when I noticed the emergency exits. They were completely blocked. The snow had drifted against the doors so heavily that they were buried under at least 4 feet of dense, packed snow. Anyone trying to exit through those doors in an emergency would be trapped. My nurse instincts kicked in immediately. Fire safety wasn't optional. Those exits needed to be clear. I went to my unit, grabbed my shovel, and got to work. It was 7:45 in the morning. I had 15 minutes before the quiet hours ended, and I'd be in the clear. I worked as fast as I could, throwing shovel after shovel of heavy snow to the side, trying to create a clear path from each emergency door. The snow was dense and wet, much heavier than the dry powder we'd had earlier in the season. My shoulders screamed in protest, but I kept going. At 7:58, I had cleared about half of the first door. 2 more minutes and I'd be legal. I could finish the job without worrying about Patricia and her ridiculous rules. "Excuse me." I turned to see Patricia herself, wrapped in that same puffy white jacket, stomping through the snow toward me like an enraged yeti. "What do you think you're doing?" she demanded. "Clearing the emergency exits," I said, breathing hard. "They're completely blocked. It's not 8 o'clock yet. You are in direct violation of HOA bylaws. Patricia, these are emergency exits. They need to be clear. It's a fire code requirement. The snow removal service will handle it when they arrive this afternoon." That's 8 hours from now. What if there's a fire? What if someone needs to evacuate? "That's not your responsibility, Mr. Foster. Put down that shovel immediately, or I will have no choice but to fine you." I stared at her, shovel in hand, snow falling gently around us in the early morning light. In that moment, something inside me snapped. I'd spent all night saving lives, dealing with the aftermath of this storm, and now this petty tyrant was threatening me for trying to ensure basic safety in my own building. "Fine," I said, driving my shovel into the snowbank and leaving it there. "You want me to stop? I'll stop." "Good. I'll be sending you a formal notice of violation by end of day. $250 fine for shoveling during quiet hours." "Sure thing, Patricia. You have a great day." I walked back to my unit, every muscle in my body aching, and collapsed on my couch. I was too angry to sleep. I kept thinking about those blocked emergency exits, about the fire marshal reports I'd seen during my training about people dying because they couldn't escape buildings. But Patricia had been crystal clear: if I went back out there before 8 a.m., I'd be fined. And given that it was now 7:59, there seemed little point in going back out for 1 minute of work. 8 o'clock came and went. I should have gone back out. I knew I should have. but I was so exhausted and so furious that I couldn't bring myself to do it. Instead, I lay on my couch, staring at the ceiling, and thought about malicious compliance. If Patricia wanted the HOA rules followed to the letter, then that's exactly what she'd get. The HOA bylaws stated that snow removal was the responsibility of the contracted service, and that residents should not attempt their own snow clearing during quiet hours. It said nothing about requiring residents to clear snow during non-quiet hours. It was the HOA's job, through their contracted service, to maintain the property. So I decided to do exactly nothing. I didn't go back out to clear those emergency exits. I didn't touch my shovel again. If the HOA wanted to fine me for trying to ensure safety, then the HOA could handle the safety themselves. I'd done my part, tried to be a good neighbor, and gotten slapped with a fine for my trouble. Around noon, I was finally drifting off to sleep when I heard sirens. Not just one or two, multiple emergency vehicles close by. I got up and looked out my window. Fire trucks and ambulances were pulling into the Ridgemont Hills parking lot. My stomach dropped. I threw on my boots and jacket and ran outside. The scene was chaos. Firefighters were working near Building C, about 100 yards from my building. Black smoke was pouring from a ground floor unit. Residents were streaming out of the front entrance, many of them in their pajamas, coughing and scared. I ran toward the crowd and grabbed Doug, my neighbor, who was standing with his wife and 2 kids. "What happened?" I asked. "Kitchen fire in the Morrison unit," he said, his face pale. "Started from the stove, I guess. The smoke detectors went off and everyone evacuated. Did everyone get out?" "I think so. The firefighters are checking now." I watched as the firefighters efficiently handled the situation, getting the fire under control within about 20 minutes. It was a relatively small fire, contained to 1 unit with damage mostly from smoke, but it could have been so much worse. As the emergency crews were packing up, I saw one of the fire marshals walking around the building, clipboard in hand, doing what looked like an inspection. He spent a long time at the back of the building, near where the emergency exits were located. The exits that were still buried under 4 feet of snow. That evening, I received an email from the HOA. It was from Patricia, sent to all residents, explaining that there had been a minor incident earlier in the day but that everyone was safe. She reminded residents to be careful with cooking appliances and to always keep fire extinguishers accessible. There was no mention of the blocked emergency exits, but there was a second email just for me. The promised formal violation notice, complete with instructions for paying my $250 fine within 30 days. I stared at it for a long time before deleting it. The next day, Friday, I went to work as usual. When I got home Saturday morning, there was an official-looking notice taped to the front door of our building. It was from the Boulder Fire Department. Notice of Violation Fire Code Section 1031.1. All exit discharge areas must be maintained clear of obstructions at all times. This property was found to be in violation during an inspection on February 10, 2025. All emergency exits must be cleared and maintained in accordance with fire code requirements. Failure to comply within 48 hours will result in fines of $500 per day until violation is corrected. A follow-up inspection will be conducted on February 13, 2025. I couldn't help but smile. The fire marshal had noticed. Of course he had noticed. Those blocked exits were a blatant violation of fire code, and after responding to a fire at the property, he'd done his due diligence. The HOA had 48 hours to clear those exits, or they'd be facing serious fines. I wondered how Patricia would handle this, whether she'd see the connection between her ridiculous enforcement of quiet hour rules and the safety violation the fire department had cited. I didn't have to wonder long. Saturday afternoon, my doorbell rang. This time it wasn't Patricia, it was Martin Reynolds, the HOA vice president and one of the few reasonable people on the board. Martin was in his 60s, retired from teaching, and generally tried to keep Patricia's more extreme impulses in check. "Hey, Paul," he said, looking tired. "Got a minute? Sure, come in." We sat in my living room and Martin got straight to the point. "Patricia tells me you were shoveling the emergency exits Thursday morning during quiet hours." I was, until she told me to stop and threatened to fine me, which she did, by the way. I showed him the email on my phone. Martin sighed heavily. "Yeah, I saw that." "Look, Paul, I'm going to be straight with you. The fire marshal's violation notice is serious. We've got 48 hours to clear all the emergency exits and keep them clear, or we're looking at $500 a day in fines. The snow removal company says they can't get here until Monday, which puts us past the deadline." "Sounds like a problem," I said neutrally. "I know you were trying to clear those exits Thursday morning. I know Patricia stopped you, and I know she fined you for it." "So what do you want from me, Martin?" He looked uncomfortable. "The board held an emergency meeting this morning. We're asking residents who are able to help clear the emergency exits. We'll provide coffee and pizza, and we'd really appreciate the help." "That's interesting, because I tried to clear them on Thursday and got fined for it. I was told, very clearly by your HOA president, that snow removal was not my responsibility and that I should never touch a shovel during quiet hours. I was told the contracted service would handle it." "I understand you're upset." "Upset? Martin, I worked a 12-hour night shift dealing with storm casualties. I came home exhausted and spent 2 hours clearing snow, including those emergency exits, because I could see they were a safety hazard. Patricia didn't care about safety. She cared about her stupid rule being followed to the letter, so I followed it. I stopped shoveling just like she demanded. Will you help us now? The fire marshal is coming back Monday. If those exits aren't clear, the HOA will be fined, and those fines get passed on to all the homeowners through increased fees." I thought about it for a long moment. Part of me wanted to help, because I genuinely cared about safety. But a bigger part of me was still furious about the entire situation. "Tell you what, Martin, I'll help clear those exits under one condition. Patricia rescinds my fine, issues a formal apology, and the HOA revises the snow removal policy to include an emergency exception for safety-critical areas like fire exits. Put it in writing." Martin nodded slowly. "I'll take it to the board, but you know Patricia. She doesn't back down easily." "Then I guess you better start looking for other volunteers. Or maybe Patricia can spend her weekend shoveling. She seemed pretty concerned about who was doing it and when." Martin left, and I felt a twinge of guilt. I wasn't trying to hurt the other residents, the people who'd be stuck with higher HOA fees if the fines accumulated. But I was tired of being treated like a criminal for trying to do the right thing. Saturday evening, I got another email. This one was from Patricia directly, and it was about what I expected. "Mr. Foster, it has come to the board's attention that you are refusing to assist with emergency snow removal despite being physically capable and available. This is a violation of the Community Spirit Clause in the HOA bylaws, Section 3, Subsection 7, which requires residents to participate in community welfare activities when called upon. Your continued obstruction and refusal to cooperate will be noted in your resident file and may result in additional penalties." I read it 3 times, my anger building with each pass. Community Spirit Clause. She had fined me for trying to help and now was threatening me for not helping. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. I wrote back, keeping my response professional but firm. Patricia, I attempted to clear the emergency exits on Thursday morning after working a 12-hour night shift. You personally ordered me to stop and subsequently fined me $250 for violating quiet hour policies. You explicitly stated that snow removal was not my responsibility and that the contracted service would handle it. I am simply following the direction you gave me and the HOA bylaws, as you've enforced them. If you believe residents should assist with snow removal, perhaps you should reconsider the policy that prohibits such assistance during certain hours and the punitive approach you've taken toward residents who attempt to help. I look forward to receiving your written response to the conditions I outlined with Martin Reynolds. I hit send, and then did something I probably should have done months ago. I started digging through the HOA bylaws, really reading them for the first time. It was a dense, 70-page document full of rules about everything from fence heights to acceptable holiday decorations. But buried in there were some interesting passages. Section 3, subsection 7, the community spirit clause Patricia had referenced was real, but it was incredibly vague. It stated that residents may be called upon to participate in activities that benefit the community welfare, but it didn't specify what constituted such activities or make them mandatory. It was the kind of clause that could mean anything or nothing, depending on who was interpreting it. More interesting was Section 12, subsection 9, which I'd never noticed before. It stated that any resident may request a board hearing to appeal fines, violations, or other penalties levied by the HOA. Such hearings must be scheduled within 14 days of the request and conducted in accordance with Colorado state law regarding homeowner association disputes. I had the right to appeal my fine, and I had the right to a formal hearing where I could present my case. I drafted another email, this time addressed to the entire HOA board. I am formally requesting a board hearing to appeal the $250 fine levied against me on February 10, 2025, for clearing snow from emergency exits. Per HOA bylaws Section 12, subsection 9, I request this hearing be scheduled within the next 14 days. I will be presenting evidence regarding the circumstances of the fine, the safety concerns that motivated my actions, and the fire code violations that resulted from the HOA's snow removal policies. Please confirm receipt of this request and provide available hearing dates. I sent it and felt a grim satisfaction. If Patricia wanted to play bureaucratic games, I could play too. I'd spent years dealing with hospital administration and their labyrinthine policies. An HOA board was amateur hour in comparison. Sunday morning came, and the emergency exits were still buried. I could see them from my window, huge mounds of snow blocking the doors, a clear and obvious violation of fire code. A few residents had apparently volunteered to help clear them, but they'd barely made a dent in the massive drifts. The snow was so heavy and compacted that it required serious effort to move, and most of the volunteers were older residents who couldn't handle the physical demand. I watched from my window, drinking my coffee, feeling like the villain in a story where I should have been the hero. But every time my conscience pricked at me, I remembered Patricia's smug face as she threatened me with a fine for trying to keep people safe. Sunday evening, Martin knocked on my door again. "We're not going to make the deadline," he said without preamble. "The exits are maybe 20% cleared. We need help, Paul." Did Patricia respond to my conditions? She's refusing. She says you violated the bylaws and the fine stands. She's also saying that your refusal to help is proving that you're not a team player and that the board should consider additional sanctions. Additional sanctions for what? For following her direct orders. For being fined when I tried to help. I know. I'm on your side here, Paul. But I'm also thinking about the rest of the community. Those fire marshal fines are going to hit everyone's wallets. Then maybe everyone should be asking Patricia why she created this situation in the first place. Why she has a rule that prevents people from clearing snow during the hours when it's most practical for them. Why she prioritizes quiet hours over fire safety. Why she fined me instead of thanking me. Martin looked defeated. I tried to get her to back down. The other board members tried too. But she's dug in. She thinks if she caves on this, residents will stop respecting the rules. She's going to learn a hard lesson about picking the wrong battles, I said. Monday morning arrived and I was off work. I stayed home, watching from my window as the fire marshal arrived at exactly 9 o'clock for his follow-up inspection. He spent about 20 minutes examining the emergency exits, taking photos, making notes on his clipboard. I saw him talking to Patricia in the parking lot, and even from my window, I could see her gesturing animatedly, probably making excuses. The fire marshal left, and about an hour later, I received an email forwarded to all residents. It was from the fire department. The Ridgemont Hills Homeowners Association has failed to correct fire code violations identified during an inspection on February 10, 2025. Emergency exits remain obstructed in violation of Fire Code Section 1031.1. Daily fines of $500 will be assessed beginning February 13, 2025, until all violations are corrected and confirmed through reinspection. The HOA is additionally required to submit a detailed plan for ongoing maintenance of emergency exits to prevent future violations. $500 a day. I did the math quickly in my head. The Ridgemont Hills HOA had about 120 units. If those fines accumulated for even a week, it would cost the association $3,500. Split among all homeowners, that would mean roughly $30 per unit added to monthly HOA fees. And if it went on longer, the costs would escalate dramatically. My phone started ringing within minutes. It was Doug. "Did you see the email?" he asked. "Yeah, I saw it." "Paul, come on, man. I know you're pissed at Patricia, but we're all going to pay for this. My wife is freaking out about the extra fees. Can't you just help clear the exits and end this?" "Doug, I tried to clear them. I got fined for it. Patricia told me explicitly that it wasn't my job and that I shouldn't do it. Now she's mad that I'm not doing it. Do you see how insane that is?" "I get it, I really do. But this is hurting all of us." "Then maybe all of you should be directing your anger at the person who created this mess. I'm not the one who made up a stupid rule about snow shoveling hours. I'm not the one who fined someone for trying to keep the building safe. I'm not the one who refused to compromise or admit fault. That's all Patricia." Doug was quiet for a moment. "You're right. You're absolutely right. I'm going to talk to some of the other residents. We need to get Patricia off the board. This is ridiculous." After I hung up with Doug, I received 5 more calls from neighbors, all saying essentially the same thing. Some were angry with me, some were angry with Patricia, but everyone was stressed about the mounting fines. I repeated the same explanation to each of them, and by the end, I could hear the tide starting to turn. People were beginning to understand that this wasn't about me being petty, it was about an HOA president who had created an impossible situation through rigid enforcement of a bad rule. Tuesday afternoon, I received an email notification about my board hearing. It was scheduled for Friday evening at 7 o'clock in the community clubhouse. The email was curt. Just the basic facts, with no indication of what to expect or what format the hearing would take. I spent the next few days preparing. I printed out the fire marshal's violation notices, the weather reports showing the storm's severity, photos I'd taken on my phone of the blocked exits, my work schedule showing I'd been on a night shift, copies of the HOA bylaws regarding quiet hours and snow removal, and a timeline of events. I also did some research on Colorado HOA law and fire code requirements. What I found was interesting. Colorado law was actually pretty clear about this stuff. HOAs had a responsibility to maintain common areas in compliance with safety regulations. Fire codes took precedence over HOA bylaws. And residents couldn't be punished for taking reasonable action to address immediate safety hazards, especially when the HOA had failed in its duty to maintain safe conditions. I also found several cases where HOAs had been held liable for injuries resulting from their failure to maintain emergency exits or address fire code violations. In one case in Denver, an HOA had been sued for $1 million after a resident died in a fire because emergency exits were blocked. The HOA had tried to argue that snow removal wasn't their responsibility, but the court had disagreed strongly. Armed with this information, I felt more confident about the hearing, but I also decided to take one more step. I called a lawyer friend of mine, Rebecca Chen, who specialized in real estate and HOA disputes. "Rebecca, I need your professional opinion on something," I said, and then explained the entire situation. She listened carefully, asking clarifying questions here and there. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "Paul, this is one of the most clear-cut cases of HOA overreach I've heard in a while. You have multiple legal arguments here. First, fire code compliance supersedes HOA bylaws that's established law. Second, you were addressing an immediate safety hazard, which is a reasonable action under Colorado's emergency doctrine. Third, the HOA's own negligence in failing to maintain the emergency exits created the situation. And fourth, punishing you for attempting to correct a safety violation that the HOA should have addressed is likely retaliation, which is prohibited under HOA law. So I have a good case. You have an excellent case. If I were you, I'd present all of this at the hearing. And I'd make it clear that if they don't rescind the fine, you're prepared to take legal action. The HOA won't want this going to court. They'd lose, and they'd be on the hook for your legal fees on top of everything else. Would you be willing to come to the hearing with me?" "As my legal representation, absolutely. Send me all your documentation and I'll review it. I'll draw up a formal demand letter too, something we can present if they don't see reason." I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I wasn't alone in this anymore. I had professional backing, legal arguments, and documentation. Patricia had picked a fight with the wrong person. Wednesday and Thursday passed in a tense waiting period. The emergency exits remained blocked, and the fire marshal's daily fines continued to accumulate. $1,000. $1,500. The HOA sent out increasingly desperate emails asking for volunteers to help with snow removal, but the damage was done. Many residents were now questioning why they should volunteer to fix a problem that the HOA had created through its own poor policies and management. I heard through Doug that there was serious talk of calling a special election to remove Patricia from the board. Several residents had started a petition, and it was gaining signatures quickly. The mood in the community had shifted from annoyance with me to anger at Patricia. Thursday evening, I received a surprise visit from Patricia herself. When I opened the door, she looked different, less confident, more worn down. The situation was clearly taking a toll. "Mr. Foster, may I speak with you?" she asked, her voice lacking its usual imperious tone. "Sure," I said, curious where this was going. We sat in my living room, and for a long moment, Patricia just looked at her hands. "The board has asked me to try to resolve this situation before Friday's hearing," she finally said. "Okay. They're concerned about the fines. We're up to $2,000 now, and it's going to keep going up every day until the exits are cleared. The snow removal company finally showed up today, but they say it's going to take at least 2 more days to properly clear all the emergency exits. That's another $1,000 in fines." "I'm aware. Some of the board members think we should rescind your fine and revise the snow shoveling policy. They think it would resolve the situation and you'd help clear the exits." I noticed she said, "Some of the board members think," not "I think." "What do you think, Patricia?" I asked. She looked up at me, and I saw something surprising in her eyes, not quite an apology, but maybe the beginning of understanding. "I think rules exist for a reason. I think if we start making exceptions and letting people do whatever they want, the whole community falls apart. But I also think—" She paused, struggling with the words. "I think maybe I should have handled Thursday morning differently. When you explained about the emergency exits, I should have listened. It wasn't a full apology, but it was more than I'd expected. Patricia, I don't enjoy watching the HOA rack up fines. I don't want everyone's fees to go up, but I also can't let you fine me for doing the right thing. Those exits needed to be cleared. It was a legitimate safety emergency. Your rule about quiet hours is fine for regular maintenance, but it can't apply when there's an immediate hazard. The board wants to offer a compromise," she said. "We'll rescind your fine. We'll add an emergency exception to the snow removal policy for fire exits and other safety-critical areas. In exchange, you help clear the exits tomorrow so we can stop the fines at the next inspection. And Friday's hearing. It would be canceled. This would be resolved." I thought about it. It was basically what I'd asked for from the beginning. The fine rescinded, the policy changed, but something still bothered me. "I want one more thing," I said. "I want a formal statement from the board, sent to all residents, explaining what happened. I want it on the record that I tried to clear those exits for safety reasons, that I was fined for it, and that the board has now recognized that was wrong. I'm not going to be the bad guy in this story, Patricia. I'm not going to be blamed for the fines or the fire code violations when I was trying to prevent exactly this situation." Patricia's jaw tightened, but she nodded. "I can agree to that. Put it all in writing. Email it to me tonight. If I have it in writing, signed by the full board, I'll be out there first thing tomorrow morning with my shovel." "I'll have it to you by 9, she said, standing up. After she left, I called Rebecca and told her about the conversation. "Get it in writing before you do anything," she advised. "And make sure it's specific: the fine rescinded, the policy change detailed, the statement to residents. Don't accept vague promises." That's the plan. At 8:45 that evening, my email dinged. It was from Martin Reynolds, sent on behalf of the entire HOA board. The email was detailed and specific. My $250 fine was officially rescinded. The snow removal policy was being amended to include an exception that read, "Residents may clear snow from emergency exits, fire escapes, and other safety-critical areas at any time, regardless of quiet hours, when such areas pose an immediate safety hazard." And there was a statement that would be sent to all residents explaining that I had attempted to address a safety concern, had been incorrectly fined, and that the board had reviewed and corrected its policy as a result. It wasn't everything I wanted. There was no explicit apology from Patricia, but it was enough. The fine was gone, the policy was fixed, and the record would show what really happened. I forwarded it to Rebecca, got her approval, and then replied to Martin accepting the terms. Friday morning, I was outside at 6 a.m. with my shovel. Doug joined me, along with 6 or 7 other residents who wanted to help. Together, we spent 4 hours clearing every emergency exit in the complex, hauling away massive amounts of snow, creating clear paths that met fire code requirements. The fire marshal came back for his inspection at noon. I watched from a distance as he checked each exit, made notes, and then had a conversation with Martin. When he left, Martin gave me a thumbs up. The violations were cleared. The daily fines would stop. That evening, the promised email went out to all residents. It was factual and straightforward, explaining the situation without excessive drama. Some residents replied with supportive messages. Others didn't respond at all. But the important thing was that the truth was now part of the official record. The board hearing was canceled, which meant I didn't get my dramatic moment presenting evidence and legal arguments. Part of me was disappointed. I'd prepared thoroughly and was ready for a confrontation. But the practical part of me was relieved. I'd gotten what I needed without having to escalate to legal action. The following Tuesday, I got home from my night shift and found a handwritten note in my mailbox. It was from Patricia. Mr. Foster, I wanted to apologize in writing for how I handled the snow removal situation. I was focused on enforcing the rules and didn't stop to consider that the rules themselves might need to be flexible in emergency situations. You were right to clear those exits, and I was wrong to fine you for it. I've learned from this experience, and I hope we can move forward with a better understanding. Thank you for your patience and for helping to resolve the fire code violations. Patricia Hendricks. I read it twice, surprised by the sincerity. It wasn't a public apology, but it was something. Maybe Patricia was capable of growth after all. 2 weeks later, I received notice that there would be a special HOA meeting to vote on several proposed bylaw changes. The snow removal policy revision was officially being added to the bylaws, but there were also other changes being proposed: a more reasonable noise policy, a streamlined process for requesting variances, and a requirement that board members receive training on Colorado HOA law and safety regulations. I attended the meeting, along with about 40 other residents, a much larger turnout than usual. Patricia ran the meeting with her typical efficiency, but there was something different about her demeanor. She seemed more open to discussion, less dictatorial. When residents raised concerns about various rules, she actually listened instead of immediately shutting them down. All the proposed changes passed unanimously. As people were leaving after the meeting, Doug pulled me aside. "Hey, just wanted to thank you," he said. "I know it got messy there for a while, but what you did needed to happen. Patricia needed to be checked. The board needed a wake-up call. Things are going to be better around here because you stood your ground." "I didn't do it to be a hero," I said. "I just got tired of being treated like a criminal for trying to help." "Well, whatever your motivation, it worked. Half the board is talking about not running for re-election next year. We might actually get some new people with fresh perspectives." That conversation stuck with me. I hadn't set out to change the HOA or reform its policies. I'd just been a tired nurse trying to clear some snow so people could safely exit the building in an emergency. But by standing up against an unjust fine and refusing to back down, I'd inadvertently started a larger conversation about how the community was governed. March brought warmer weather and melting snow. The emergency exits, now properly maintained by a new snow removal contractor who was actually competent, remained clear. I continued working my night shifts, coming and going at odd hours, occasionally shoveling snow when it was needed, always during approved hours, though now with the knowledge that I could make exceptions for safety. Patricia and I developed a cordial but distant relationship. We'd nod to each other in passing, exchange brief pleasantries about the weather, but we both understood that we'd never be friends. She was still the HOA president, still concerned with rules and order, but she was a bit less rigid, a bit more willing to listen. In April, I was working a shift when a young family came into the ER. They'd been in a house fire, nothing too serious, but the parents were shaken and the kids were scared. As I was treating them, the father mentioned that they'd barely made it out because one of their exits had been blocked by stored furniture in the stairwell. "We complained to the landlord about it for months," he said, "but he never did anything. We got lucky that the fire started near the front door so we could get out that way. If it had started in the back of the house." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. I thought about the blocked emergency exits at Ridgemont Hills, about how close we'd come to a similar situation. If that kitchen fire in the Morrison unit had been worse, if people had needed to use those back exits and found them buried under 4 feet of snow, it could have been a tragedy. People could have died because Patricia was more concerned with quiet hours than safety. The thought made me realize that standing up to her hadn't just been about pride or principle. It had potentially saved lives. Maybe not that specific day, but by forcing the HOA to take fire code compliance seriously, by getting the policies changed and creating exceptions for safety-critical situations, I'd helped ensure that future emergencies would be handled better. When June came around, the HOA held its annual election for board positions. Patricia ran unopposed for president apparently. Nobody wanted the headache of dealing with all the paperwork and complaints, but 3 of the 5 other board positions got new members. Younger residents, people who worked regular jobs and understood the challenges of dealing with HOA rules while trying to live normal lives. At the first meeting with the new board composition, they voted to create a safety committee to review all HOA policies and ensure compliance with fire codes, building codes, and other safety regulations. They asked me to serve on the committee, given my experience as a nurse and my obvious concern for safety issues. I accepted, figuring it was a good way to make sure the lessons from the snow shoveling incident didn't get forgotten. Over that summer, our committee did a thorough review of the property. We found several other potential issues: burned out lights in stairwells, a few loose railings, some cracked sidewalks that posed tripping hazards. We created a prioritized list of fixes and presented it to the board. Patricia initially bristled at the cost estimates, but the new board members backed us up, and the repairs were approved. By August, Ridgemont Hills was genuinely safer than it had been in years. The emergency exits were maintained properly year-round. The lighting was fixed. The walkways were repaired. We'd even updated the community emergency plan and posted evacuation maps in all the common areas. I ran into Patricia one evening while checking the mail. "Your safety committee has been keeping us busy," she said, and there might have been a hint of humor in her voice. "That's kind of the point," I replied. "I suppose it is." She paused, then added, "You know, I looked back at the HOA records from the past 10 years. We've never had a serious safety violation before the fire marshal incident. I was proud of that record. But I've realized that just because we hadn't been caught in violation didn't mean we were actually maintaining proper safety standards. We got complacent." "That happens," I said. "The important thing is that we're fixing it now." "Yes, well, thank you for your service on the committee. And for pushing back when I needed to be pushed back." It was the closest thing to a full apology I was likely to get, and I accepted it with a nod. As fall approached, and the weather forecasts started mentioning potential early snow, the HOA sent out a community-wide email about winter preparedness. It included information about the snow removal service schedule, reminders about keeping walkways clear, and a specific note about the emergency exit policy. All residents are encouraged to help keep emergency exits clear during winter weather, the email read. If you notice an exit becoming blocked by snow or ice, please feel free to clear it at any time, regardless of quiet hours. Safety always takes priority over noise concerns. Thank you for helping to keep our community safe. I smiled when I read it. Those were words I never thought I'd see in an official HOA communication, at least not from a board led by Patricia Hendricks. When the first snow of the new season fell in October, just a light dusting, nothing serious, I was home sleeping after a night shift. I woke up around noon and looked out my window at the community. Several residents were out with shovels, clearing walkways and driveways. And there, working at one of the emergency exits, was Patricia herself, carefully shoveling snow away from the door. She looked up, saw me watching from my window, and gave a small wave. I waved back. It had been a long, strange journey from that February morning when she'd threatened to fine me for trying to keep people safe. We'd been on opposite sides of a conflict that had cost the HOA thousands of dollars in fire marshal fines and created a community crisis. But in the end, we'd both learned something. I'd learned that sometimes you have to stand up against unjust rules, even when it's uncomfortable, and even when it makes you temporarily unpopular. I'd learned that documentation and knowledge of the law matter, that having your facts straight gives you power in disputes. And I'd learned that malicious compliance following the letter of an unreasonable rule to expose its flaws can be an effective tool for forcing change. Patricia had learned, I hoped, that rules exist to serve people, not the other way around. That flexibility and common sense are just as important as consistency and order. And that being a good leader means being willing to admit mistakes and adjust course when you're wrong. The emergency exits stayed clear that winter. The snow removal service did their job properly, and when they fell behind during heavy storms, residents pitched in to help without worrying about being fined. The fire marshal never had to come back. I kept working my night shifts at the hospital, kept living my life on an unusual schedule. But I never again had to worry about being punished for doing the right thing at the wrong time of day. The bylaws had changed, the culture had shifted, and Ridgemont Hills became a community where safety mattered more than arbitrary rules. Sometimes I think about how differently things could have gone. If I just paid the fine and moved on, the emergency exit problem would have persisted. The fire code violations would have continued unnoticed until perhaps a real tragedy occurred. The HOA's unreasonable policies would have remained in place, causing problems for other residents in other situations. By choosing to fight, by refusing to back down, I'd forced a reckoning that the community needed. It hadn't been pretty, and for a while I'd been the bad guy in some people's eyes. But the end result was worth it. A year after the snow shoveling incident, I was at the hospital working a particularly brutal night shift. Multiple trauma cases, a cardiac arrest, 2 strokes, and a steady stream of less critical patients kept us running all night. During a brief lull around 5 in the morning, I was standing at the nurse's station updating charts when one of the ER doctors, Marcus Williams, came over with coffee. "Heard you had quite the adventure with your HOA last year," he said. "News travels," I replied. "My wife is on our HOA board." She heard about it at some kind of regional HOA conference. "Apparently, your situation became a case study in what not to do as an HOA president." Really? Yeah. They used it as an example of prioritizing procedures over safety and how it can backfire legally and financially. Your HOA president's name got mentioned, not in a flattering way. I felt a twinge of sympathy for Patricia, despite everything. Having your mistakes turned into a cautionary tale couldn't be pleasant. I didn't want it to become a big thing, I said. I just wanted to clear some snow. Well, it helped more than just your community. My wife said several HOAs in the Boulder area revised their snow removal and emergency access policies after hearing about your incident. You probably prevented similar problems elsewhere. That thought stayed with me for the rest of the shift. My stubborn refusal to accept an unjust fine had rippled out beyond Ridgemont Hills, influencing how other communities thought about their rules and priorities. It was a small thing in the grand scheme of the world, but it mattered. When spring came again, the HOA held another annual meeting. Patricia announced that she would not be seeking re-election as president. She'd served for 7 years, she said, and felt it was time for fresh leadership. The assembled residents gave her polite applause, and I joined in. Whatever our differences, she had devoted significant time and energy to the community, even if her methods had sometimes been flawed. Martin Reynolds was elected as the new president. His first act was to establish regular safety reviews as a permanent part of the HOA's responsibilities, ensuring that what happened with the emergency exits would never happen again. I continued serving on the safety committee for another year before stepping down to focus more on my work at the hospital. But I stayed engaged with the community, attending meetings when I could, voting on important issues, and generally trying to be a good neighbor. The blocked emergency exits, the fire marshal fines, the conflict with Patricia, all of it faded into community history, a story that older residents would occasionally tell newer ones. Did you hear about the time the HOA got fined thousands of dollars because they wouldn't let someone shovel snow? It became a legend, a cautionary tale, and eventually just a memory. But the changes it brought lasted. The policies remained in place. The culture of prioritizing safety over arbitrary rules persisted. And I'd like to think that Ridgemont Hills became a better place to live, because one exhausted nurse refused to accept being punished for doing the right thing. On a cold evening in December, almost 2 years after the original incident, I was walking back from checking my mail when I saw Patricia sitting on a bench near the community clubhouse. It was unusual to see her just sitting, not rushing off to some HOA business or inspecting something for violations. "Evening, Patricia," I said. "Paul, how have you been?" "Good. You?" "Adjusting to retirement from the board. It's strange having so much free time." I sat down on the bench beside her, and we watched the last light fade from the sky. "I've been meaning to tell you something," she said after a while. "That whole situation with the snow shoveling, it changed how I thought about a lot of things. Not just HOA rules, but how I approach problems in general. I was so focused on being right, on maintaining order, that I couldn't see the bigger picture." "We both handled it imperfectly," I said. "I could have been less stubborn too." "No," she said firmly. "You were right to be stubborn. If you hadn't pushed back, nothing would have changed. I would have kept enforcing rules without thinking about whether they made sense. The community needed someone to stand up and say this is wrong, even when it was difficult." We sat in companionable silence for a few more minutes before Patricia stood up to leave. "Take care of yourself, Paul, and thank you." "You too, Patricia." I watched her walk away, and I thought about how conflict, as uncomfortable as it is, can sometimes lead to growth and positive change. The snow shoveling incident had been stressful and frustrating while it was happening, but it had ultimately made both me and Patricia into better versions of ourselves and had made our community safer and more reasonable. The emergency exits remained clear through that winter and every winter after. The HOA continued to evolve, becoming more responsive to residents' needs while still maintaining the community standards that made Ridgemont Hills a pleasant place to live. And I continued my work at the hospital, saving lives in the ER, secure in the knowledge that if I came home at dawn after a snowstorm, I could clear whatever needed clearing without fear of being punished for it. Sometimes the smallest battle's a dispute over snow shoveling, a $250 fine. A stubborn refusal to back down can have consequences far beyond what we imagine. They can change policies, shift perspectives, and create ripples that extend throughout a community and beyond. And sometimes, standing up for what's right, even in the face of seemingly petty opposition, is exactly what needs to happen. Not because we want to be heroes or make grand statements, but because if we don't stand up for the reasonable and the sensible, then the unreasonable and the absurd will continue unchecked. The blocked emergency exits stayed clear, the rules got fixed, and life went on. And that, in the end, was all I'd ever wanted.